always say to people when they're like, I'm just not sure if I should get into self-promotion, I say, what are you doing now?
Yeah.
And they'll say like, nothing, or maybe I'm posting a little bit here, or I'm doing this, and I'm like, and how's that going for you? And that's the reason they're coming to read my book or to my talks or to speak to me, because whatever they're doing right now isn't serving them.
Welcome everyone. We are thrilled to invite you to a whole new season of Reservations for Two here at STK. But before we dive in, let's take a moment to emphasize the importance of self-care. Remember, professional therapy is a recipe for a healthy and a happier you. However, here, we also like to celebrate the joy that comes with sharing meals with friends, because good food and good company go hand in hand. So get ready for a season full of laughs, wonderful cuisines, joy, learning experiences for your own betterment journey. So we hope you enjoy this season. Mwah. In a world that preaches humility, let's redefine it. True humility is not about minimizing our achievements, it's about acknowledging them and being our biggest advocates. It's about standing tall in the face of doubt and saying, I deserve to be here. Now join me as I have a reservation with Stefanie Sword Williams, entrepreneur, public speaker, platform founder, Forbes 30 Under 30, and author of Fuck Being Humble. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm really excited to have this conversation because I remember literally when I first came across your book being like, it's so needed right now, because again, we live in like such a society where we are taught to be humble. We're taught to kind of like mute ourselves and kind of be a little bit more demure in our ambitions, our expectations and our goals. And literally this book absolutely rips into that whole narrative of like self-promotion is almost arrogant, because it's not. It literally says in your book, it's not optional, it's essential, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's the sort of message I want people to remember, is that of course I believe in being humble. Like I always have to caveat that when I go on podcasts or when I give talks, like of course I believe in humility, but what I hate to see is people missing out on opportunities because they're being so modest.
Yeah.
And that's where it's problematic, this narrative of if you work hard, you'll go far. And people don't seem to realise that like a big part of going far and doing well is also telling the story behind your successes. Yeah. Otherwise people won't know the impact that you make.
And I feel like recently the reason that it really spoke to me is because recently I've been a major advocate for like, no one is going to shout about you louder than yourself. No one is going to toot your own horn more than you can toot yours, because no one understands the drive that's within you more than you do. And I think that's why it's like self-advocacy is so important. So if we kind of just go back into like the central themes of your book and what got you into a headspace where you're like, okay, like I need to write this. Where was that? Because you said it took you 8 months to do this, isn't it?
Yeah, so I had 8 months.
Yeah.
It would have taken me longer, but I had a deadline that I was giving to me. So I had 8 months whilst I was working full time. For me, it was when I was working in advertising, I started my career in advertising. And I found it really interesting how we would make stories and we would make these incredible campaigns for brands, but then we would never want to promote our own work because we were like, if it's good enough, it'll get in press. Or if it's good enough, it'll win an award, or people will just talk about it. And I found it really strange. I was like, our job is literally to tell stories for our brands, but we as a creative agency don't want to tell stories. And it was very much like, let's be humble because that shows that we're like cooler. We're not desperate. It sets us up to be like, we don't need this. It will come to us. So I remember feeling that frustration in work and thinking that's strange. And then I remember going to networking events, speaking to people, and just like generally people find the world of professional development either really dry, quite boring, quite corporate, and they just check out of it before they've even explored the benefits of it.
Yeah.
And the whole vibe of that is like, oh, it's just not for me. I couldn't possibly think about networking. Like, that's just not my vibe. And so again, I was like thinking about all of these different things and just the societal narrative that it is better to be humble than it is to self-promote, especially in the UK. Like, I was laughing earlier.
Thing, isn't it?
I was talking to someone recently who's based in New York, and I was like, yes, my business is called Fuck Being Humble, and it's all about self-promotion. And she was like, in the UK? I was like, like, honestly, one of the hardest markets to crack. And that's why it's been so amazing to see people's response and the reception to it, is because the journey I've been on, like when I first started saying fuck being humble, people were not ready for it. And now I feel like people are like knocking on my door. They want to work with me. They want me to share the story because post-pandemic, like job security is not there, and there is an employment crisis, and people are looking at other ways to make sure that their value is seen.
It's so funny because like we have had a shift literally post-pandemic where everyone now realizes it's almost like it's hunger. Like everyone's like, okay, you know what, I need to go and get it because the world can literally just stop like that. Yeah. And you do realize that you have to kind of break this British thing of being like politely like humble and like politely like, no, I don't need it, I'm not desperate.
It doesn't really serve you.
No, it
like
doesn't.
I always say to people when they're like, I'm just not sure if I should get into self-promotion, I say, what are you doing now?
Yeah.
And they'll say like, nothing, or maybe I'm posting a little bit here, or I'm doing this, and I'm like, and how's that going for you? And that's the reason they're coming to read my book or to my talks or to speak to me, because whatever they're doing right now isn't serving them, but they're working really bloody hard, but just no one's seeing it. And that for me just feels like such an unfair like story that we've been told, because it's not the full picture. Like I always give the example of like when you look at the Kardashians, it's Kris Jenner. The Kardashian sisters are not like talents in their own right and were just spotted. It is a manager behind them, getting them into all the rooms, promoting their work, saying all their great things. And not all of us have the budgets and luxury of having a Kris Jenner to fight our corner, right?
Wish I did.
I know, wish I did. Chris, if you're watching, we will be your next client.
I will be a Kardashian if you need me to.
We will become your extended family. But yeah, so I think it's like, you know, so many of us don't have that privilege and that access to have somebody doing that for us. So the responsibility is on us. And what you said earlier, I thought was really interesting, that like nobody's going to say it as well as you. And I think some people might be listening thinking like, actually loads of people are better at tooting my horn than I am. But I think what it is that nobody wants it as much as you. And that's why you have to be the person promoting your message, shouting it, because sure, you might think somebody else could promote you better, but nobody's going to do it as hard as you, because you are the person that wants your success. And it's really risky to put your future in the hands of others. That's what I always say to people, like, unless you know that person, or you've got one person covering your back, you have got to be that person going out there and making sure your name is heard.
And then even when like you kind of like take it back to, I guess maybe like you growing up and in your own kind of like personal journey of life, would you always say that you were someone who believed in self-advocacy?
So I always joke, like, I think if you were to ask my family, they'd be like, yeah, she's been confident since she was about 3. Like, you know, like at full transparency, I think I was always very extroverted, very chatty. I always loved like fashion and clothes and I guess expressing myself. And I was very creative, more like down the art route than I was like academic. So I think I was always they always used to say like, she'll have a chat show one day. We're not sure like what she's going to do, but she'll probably have some sort of stage or thing, which is hilarious because now I am a public speaker. So it's like, yeah, you actually predicted that one quite well. But yeah, I think that's always been present. And I think what I have been super fortunate with, like my dad was always someone who could like look at my CV and be like, I'm going to turn you into an entrepreneur at the age of like 12. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure I've actually got the like evidence to prove that, but he was, I think both my parents, to be fair, showed me the importance of like storytelling with your career, and why it's really important to bring to the surface the things that you've done and to talk about your hobbies and interests and articulate yourself, like your personal bio on your CV, like your elevator pitch. How do we make sure that we sell that? So I think that was very much, because they'd moved jobs quite regularly as well, it was very much like they'd had the experience themselves to then pass through to me. And then I did a degree that was all around communication and promotion. So one semester we did a whole semester on self-promotion. So by the end of uni, I had like business cards, a website, a portfolio, like I had like my own URL. And I remember my friends being like, who do you think you are? And I'm like, at the time, even I was like, oh, I'm only like 19. This feels really like far-fetched to have like your business cards. Like, who's taking my business card at 19? And I don't think I was offering anything either. But it really, really set me up on that journey of like, this isn't something to be embarrassed of. Actually, it's going to really help you in the long run. And I think even to this day, people could be like 40 and be like, oh, is it a bit cringe that I've got a business card? And I think having that exposure early on to this world of like self-promotion, marketing yourself, storytelling really helped to set me up as I navigated my career to not avoid it or feel like it was something to be embarrassed of.
Yeah, and I think it is that whole notion of like, it's amazing that your parents set you up that way, but I think when you kind of look at like the general population who are kind of dealing with like imposter syndrome,
Yeah,
are having to navigate that whole thing of like, well, I'm just not good enough. Like you said,
Yeah.
like having a business card at 19, you were kind of thinking like, what the heck, like who the hell am I even giving this to? Like,
yeah,
what am I
literally,
even selling?
literally.
You know, but it is that whole thing of knowing that like, you kind of have to get into a mindset of knowing that, you know, like I am important as well, and you have to kind of defeat that imposter syndrome. So would you say that in your journey you've ever had to deal with a level of imposter syndrome?
Absolutely.
Major.
Like, especially writing the book, which I love that it's just like really
it's just standing
placed
tall.
here, like really natural.
Hi. In case you missed it.
In case you missed what my book is.
Yeah.
But yeah, because of that feeling of not really ever being celebrated for being like smart or academic, or I did a lot of creative subjects at school, and I did well in those subjects, but I was never somebody who was told, you're amazing with words.
Yeah.
So the thought to be like, oh, you're going to write a book, it was like, that was never in my wildest dreams in my path.
Yeah.
So when I was originally approached to write the book, somebody was like, you've come up with a great initiative, you've come up with a great idea, fuck being humble is amazing, you should write a book. And I was like, no, I'm fine, thanks. Like I literally was like, thanks but no thanks, and hung up sort of thing. Because I just didn't view myself in that way. And I think it was a combination of like fear, not really knowing if I had the capacity or capability to do it. And actually it was through running my events and continuing to spread the message, to build the community, that I could see how much this was helping people, how organic it was building, like word of mouth and people promoting it for me, that actually I was like, if I don't really want to build a team, which I'm not sure I ever do with my business, I'm kind of happy to be a one-woman show, how can I make sure that my advice and my learnings and my guidance can reach as many people as possible? And also in an accessible way, like the book's like £10, £15 sort of thing. Like I want to always make sure that Fuck Being Humble's training and educational content is easy to access, because I think so much of the good quality professional development has a high price tag, and that means that people are kept out of conversations when really they deserve to have this knowledge and this information. So I think that journey of imposter syndrome was very present at the start of writing the book, especially throughout the writing the book. Like my agent was amazing. I had an editor who would read through it and was like, yep, it's good, it's good, it's good. But I think my agent really like held my hand through the process, and she's still my agent now. So I really respect her for seeing the potential with Fuck Being Humble and taking me on all those years ago, when really I was a very small fish at the time. And I think one of the hardest things was my book was coming out in May 2020.
Oh my God, hi.
So I quit my job in March 2020 to run the business full time, to be a public speaker. And 2 weeks later, all events got cancelled and everybody had to stay in their houses. And then the book was coming out in May, and then I got told it was going to get delayed. So it wasn't going to come out till September. So I was gearing myself up mentally for the book to come out, and then I just had to sit and wait even longer. And the book was ready. I had a physical version of it. And every time I read it, I was like, oh my God, that's so embarrassing. Or like, why did I put that in there? I'm like, oh my God, people are going to judge me. And I had like this even longer, more drawn out experience of, when you write a book, you can't change it.
Yeah.
It is one of the most permanent forms of self-promotion that you can never redact. You can't edit, you can't delete, you can't hide. It's out in the world now. And, I am really proud of it. But of course whenever you grow and whenever you get better in your role or what you do, you're always going to look back and be like, oh, I wish I'd have put that in there. Or maybe I could have said that better. But I guess that's a clear learning to me that I have developed and I have grown. But yeah, it was absolutely present writing the book. And still to this day, like I know and I believe that I'm a very good public speaker, but when I share stages with like some of my icons or some of the massive people, I'm going, should I be here right now? What's going on? This feels too good to be true. So I think you're always going to feel it. But I was talking to a friend at the weekend and we were talking about relationships and emotions and why it's okay and it's true that two things can be true at once. You can be really, really confident in yourself but also have imposter syndrome.
100%.
You can really, really believe in yourself, but also be really scared of starting. So I think just normalizing that conversation as well, of being like, two things can be true, and you are very normal to doubt yourself, but also really believe in yourself. So I think it's just finding that balancing act as well.
And I think it's so important that you speak about, like, obviously making it, you wanted to create something that was also accessible, because you do have all this kind of like educational material that is accessible but at a higher level, because having a level of self-advocacy is so fundamental to like anyone's success in this world. Like, you have to believe in yourself. You have to be able to kind of like negate all the thoughts that, like, I guess the world makes you believe. And, like you said, even when you were working at like your advertising company, and you were going through a phase where you were like, why are we being silent about what we can offer? Like, why are we being kind of like cool and acting? It's so important for you to be like, no, I'm here and I'm good at what I do, and I'm capable and I'm able. Would you say that in your personal life there is a level of there was anything that was almost like a catalyst that felt like, okay, this book is also needed for me?
It's a really good question, actually. I think the way that I was feeling at the time, I guess one of the things that I'm really fortunate of is when you build a brand about self-promotion, you have to self-promote.
You have to now become the face of self-promotion.
So it was quite good at the time, because what I was almost doing was like offloading everything I'd learned in my career, and then also applying everything of like kind of my new thinking and my journeys. And I think when it comes to like embracing that self-promotion, it really did force me to throw myself in the deep end. And I actually think that's what's been really interesting about the journey, is that I know there's forms of self-promotion that I'm good at. So like, I know like networking, I just love talking to people. So I just love chatting, and that didn't ever feel scary to me. But trying things like video content, where I'm a public speaker, people would just think, oh, she can do that. Honestly, it's been such a hard process for me, and still to this day I find it really difficult.
Like on social media?
Yeah, just like doing TikTok like reels or Instagram, just anything, like speaking to a camera in that way, like this kind of vibe, I'm fine, because I don't feel like I'm like, I don't know, really like nitpicking about myself, and I hate the sound of my own voice. And you know, when it's almost like when you've got too much control, it becomes like really scary and daunting. So I think, but I've always been very vocal about the things that I'm comfortable with self-promotion, what I'm not. And it's one of my pieces of advice that when you're going to self-promote, at least do the thing that you're good at self-promoting, and start off with that. Because if you are terrible at speaking on video, or you really don't feel comfortable, it's going to show. And then that form of self-promotion isn't actually going to put you in a good light. So I think it's all about building up. But I have really tried to be very transparent on like, here are the things that I think I'm good at, and here's why I embrace them. But also, here are the things that I'm really not good at when it comes to self-promotion. But here's why I'm trying anyway, because I see the benefits, and I don't want to say to myself, I just don't do that. It's a very closed mindset to say like, that's just not for me, so I'm just never going to embrace that.
You kind of just shut yourself off, isn't it?
Exactly.
And like, what is your process? Like, so your mental process of when you're like, okay, you know what, you are like, say for example, you're about to pick up that phone and you're like, my hair is out of place, there's so much going on. Like, what is your come down process of being back, or of getting back to, okay, do you know what, the message is more important than whatever else it is that is making me believe I can't do this right now?
So when I was writing my book, actually, one of the things I kept saying to myself is if one person benefits from this, it's all that matters. Ego aside, like if one person can benefit from something I'm sharing, something that I'm saying, something that they can see me doing, then it's bigger than does my hair look out of place, or is my voice annoying?
The message is more important.
It's more important. And I think actually like, it's really interesting how people, I did a course last year, and again, it was like 5 days in a studio recording, and it was actually in Madrid. So I didn't have like my friends or anyone around, and I felt like super isolated, and I found the whole process really difficult. And when I shared it, I was like, I nearly cried on set about like 10 times, like really struggled. But that was what people resonated with the most, because they were like, I really get that. Whereas if I went out and was like, here's my shiny new course, and it was super easy and life is just a breeze, people don't feel that like, you know, synergy with you. And I think that's why I always say with your self-promotion is like, don't wait until it's polished and perfect. Actually show that journey and that transformation, because I think people will either look up to your story, they'll see themselves in it, or they'll like rate the fact that you're putting yourself in that situation, even though that you are open about the way you don't feel in that sort of time. So I always think it's that thing of start before you're ready. Know your impact. I actually did a talk recently and I said, measure the right metrics.
Yeah.
So if I'm posting something about coming to one of my upcoming events, I don't care about how many likes and comments are on that post. I care about how many people sign up.
Yeah.
Or if I'm selling a course, I don't care about how many people reshared it. I'm like, have you gone onto my shop and bought my course?
Yeah.
That's what I'm measuring. So this is where it's really important when it comes to social media in particular, to make sure that you have got a really clear objective of what you're trying to achieve from this. And something I shared recently was, just because people aren't vocally cheering you on or visible doesn't mean they're not impressed.
Yeah.
And this is something I've noticed a lot. Like, I have some clients that will contact me like, I've been following you on LinkedIn for years. I'm like, well, you haven't liked anything. You haven't commented. You haven't shared anything. And that would tell me, and I'd be like, oh, you know, like, they're clearly not interested. And actually, it's like some people just don't engage in that way. So like, sell through the silence is something I've heard recently, and I love that. And it's like, just keep going, even if you don't feel like people are queuing up round the block to back you right now. It may just be that they're not ready, or it might be that they're just watching in the background, but they're still actually really impressed.
Hi guys, I hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. Well, here's a chance for you to enjoy some meals on us, of course. Use the code below for 20% off your next reservation for tea. You're welcome. Yeah, I think, I think what you're saying is like sounding so pivotal to me, because again, like we were speaking before we started recording about like building this and trying to build this brand. And I think again, like it's that there's a term that you've coined, FOSS, fear of sounding stupid. I think I literally, if there was anything that, if you could open my head, it'd be like FOSS, because you have that, especially in a world where all you kind of see is the finished product, and you see the likes, and you see the cheering for everybody else, and you're like, okay, it's kind of silent around here. Should I still be doing this? Does this really matter? Is this making the necessary impact that I think it should be? But you've also then developed a skill set in order to work through that. Would you like to share?
Yeah, I think when it comes to like FOSS, I think what's really interesting, there's been so much talk about like imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is that feeling of like, yes, I may have worked really hard, but am I good enough to be here? Whereas I think what FOSS taps into is more about, I'm worried about the judgment regardless. Like, I'm just worried about looking, sounding stupid, saying something that people don't agree with. Like, it's more about just that, like, what is everyone else gonna say, or what do they think? Which is really what we care about as humans, which, as much as I could say, no one care about this. It's so easy to shake that feeling off. It's not. But what I always say to people is like, when you worry about sounding stupid, you become generic. Because you do everything you can not to stand out. You actually just blend in. So when people are like, oh yeah, I'm working really hard on this thing and it just doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And I'm like, okay, so talk me through the process. What are you doing? What are you not doing? And they're like, oh no, I won't ask for an instruction from someone because I don't want to look like I'm desperate, or like, you know, and it's that thing where I'm like, okay, well then you're not working and trying really hard at everything you possibly can do, because you're letting this fear of sounding stupid get in the way. And it really is just something that I think affects so many people. But I always kind of remind people that it's like that thing of like, what's the cost if you don't do this? It's a really good question to ask yourself. If you don't do that thing, what's the cost? So people are like, oh, you know, I'm like, a lot of people are speaking to me at the moment about having to quit their business to go work full time because they just can't handle the inconsistency of client work, or, you know, feast and famine. Sometimes you've got stuff, sometimes you don't. And when I say to them, I'm like, are you doing everything you possibly can before you go back to that route? It's not to say it's not a bad route, but like, just before you tap out, have you tried every single thing that you can to keep this going? And they're like, oh no, I've not tried that. Or I've not tried that. Oh no, I've not tried that. I'm like, so before you give up on yourself or this idea, at least try, because there is another option, but you owe it to yourself to try. So I think it's always asking people of like, at what cost of this sounding stupid is more important. And like, I try and show people like 2 lists where I say like, here's what will happen when you self-promote. There are 2 things that can happen negatively. It's like, people mock you, or it's crickets, right? all the good things are you could get new clients, you
Yeah.
could get a new job, you could win opportunities, you could go on podcasts, you could get reached out by press, you could make more money, you could, you know, like the list is so
Endless.
long
Yeah.
when you look at the benefits versus the negatives.
Yeah.
And really the negatives are actually just, it all comes back to ego.
Yeah.
Like it really does come back to ego. And I know because I've been there and I've done these things, and we've all got to start from somewhere. Sometimes it is like, yeah, starting from the bottom, I've got 10 followers, please. But it's not about the metrics. And that's why I think it's really important to measure the right thing. Like if you're a coach, you don't need 10,000 followers.
Yeah.
You need 10 clients max, because you don't need to service that many people. So that's why it's really important with any form of self-promotion to ask yourself, why am I doing this? What am I trying to achieve? And what is like the legacy that I want to leave? Or like, what is it that I want to be known for? And when you reflect on those questions, you'll actually create a self-promotion strategy that feels right for you.
So for someone who's kind of like watching this and who is, say like they've started a new business and they've started a new brand that they're trying to build, and they are absolutely struggling with their self-promotion, what practical tips, like say they go into a networking event on the weekend, what practical tips would you give them?
So I love networking events as an example, because I am like a serial networker. This is what I love doing. So one of the things that I talk about actually in the book, because there's a whole chapter on networking, is nobody is born a networker.
Yeah.
So like I said, I've always been chatty.
Yeah.
I've always like loved speaking to people. But what I learned when I worked in new business, so like trying to attract clients when I worked full time, is that you have to really practice your networking approach, and it is strategic, right? So my advice would be like, always research the people that are attending the event, any of the speakers. What have they been doing recently? What are they sharing? Are you following them? Have you commented or liked one of their recent posts? Like, do all that pre-research before you get in the room. Be really clear on the things that you want to say about yourself. So sometimes what I would remind people is that when you go in and just say like, oh, I'm a podcaster, for example, they might just be like, okay, cool. But what they might not know is like you're a podcaster helping people, like helping to spread happiness, like, or helping spread joy. And just saying that little line helps to create a point of differentiation. So when you're going into those rooms, what are the things that you want to leave people remembering you for? Because I think we can introduce ourselves just using our titles, and actually they don't summarize who we really are or what our intentions are. Yeah. And then I would always say, like, think of opportunities to stay connected with that person that's not always the transactional thing. So let's say you were going to a networking event and you were wanting to interview someone for your podcast. The very first time they meet you, you might not be like, I want you on my podcast and I think you'd be great. You might just be like, oh, I'd love to like grab your email and I could send you my podcast series so you could check it out. Yeah. And it's just like the small steps of building that relationship and turning that connection, or turning that stranger into a connection, rather than like a lot of people. I always say it's like dating. When you match on a dating app, you don't ask someone to marry them on the first message, do you? Because you would look slightly strange, right? Yeah, you'd get blocked, right? And it's the same in business. So like when you go to a networking event, don't be like, oh, can you be one of my clients? Or like, can I have a job tomorrow? Like, because you're still a stranger to them, right? So it's more about, how do you create that next conversation with them? So can I get your business card? Or can I grab your email? Or I'd love to add you on LinkedIn. Like, how do you take them on the small steps to start building that relationship, and to treat relationships as not transactional exchanges, but as relationships? Yeah.
And I think even like outside of business, I think it's super important, even like in like one's like personal journey with life, friends and family, it's super important to have a level of self-advocacy where you can stand up for yourself, you can set your boundaries, set your intentions, manage your relationships in like a holistic way that feeds your wellness and that feeds you and the person that you want to be. So how are you managing that? Because outside of business, there's still a level of like self-promotion and self-advocacy and almost like self-love that you have to provide yourself in order to get to that next better and more enlightened version of yourself.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point. Like, I think for me, one of the things I really struggle with is rest.
Yeah.
When you run your own business and there's like nobody else involved, it's really difficult to switch off. It's non-stop. You're like, I don't know, you'll be like in the cinema and you're thinking about something to post on Instagram. Like it's very hard to turn your mind off.
Yeah.
And I think what I've really tried to do is not be too strict on the way I work and when I work and just let that work for me. So like sometimes I don't know, like if I'm having a day where I'm like, it's nothing is coming out and I've just got to just kind of letting myself and not forcing that. And then if I do need to do a bit of extra work on a Saturday morning, I will do that on my level, like when I feel productive and like just listening to those productivity hours, but likewise knowing when to rest. So I did a podcast last year with some friends where we did an episode on rest. And there's 7 types of rest.
Yeah.
So it's not just like, I want to lay on a sofa.
Yeah.
There's social rest, there's mental rest, there's creative rest, there's spiritual rest. And getting to an understanding where it's like, what type of rest do I need in order to be the best version of myself in the future? So what I've noticed is I'm a social person. I say yes to everything. My job is very social.
Yeah.
I give a lot of energy to other people, but actually like, who gives energy back to me or where do I get inspiration from? So this year I've really committed to like going to more events that aren't networking and that aren't business. That's actually my self-development and not treating it as like, oh, I need to be on it and handing out cards.
To be like
always, I want to just learn myself. So I've been taking myself to more events in that way, having those resting moments where I'm like, okay, this is like no laptops or I'm reading more, you know, just trying to create points where productivity isn't the end goal. Basically, it's not about how is this going to help my business, it's about how is it going to help me. And even just little things like sleep, like going to bed on time and just giving myself the best chance rather than like doing everything I possibly can and then like me as an individual being the lowest priority. You know, that's something that can so easily happen and it really infiltrates into work.
100%, especially when you are trying to build something from the ground up, isn't it? And I think sometimes we give so much to this part and then almost like negate the fact that this part also matters. And I think for me, that's what wellness is. It's just finding that I always say like this equilibrium of like every sense of yourself just being at peace and knowing that, you know what, like it's that thing that you said, like 2 things can coexist. I can be a really hard worker, but I can also rest, and I can be promoting a business, but I can also just shut my laptop and have a day off and just like relax and chill. And I think when you're dealing with your mental and emotional wellness as well, when you are also trying to shout about yourselves from the rooftop, like, and then you do kind of sometimes deal with a level of rejection. How do you deal with that?
Or even like one of the things I was talking with my friends of like a vulnerability hangover is something that people talk a lot about. It's like I've showed up and now I feel really vulnerable and now I feel really exposed and it's like, oh, how do I deal with that? Like I think that's something that's really common with when you are putting yourself out there. I think one of the biggest things that's helped me the most is strong support network. And by that, I think what's really important to say on that topic is that the people you grew up with or your immediate network don't have to be your strong support network.
That's insane.
So I think we put a lot of pressure on like our family members or our partners or our best friends or the people that know us the most to be the support networks, when actually some of the people that I feel most supported with, like the most comfort, are the ones that I've met in the past few years since I've built Fuck Being Humble, who know me for this, who have engaged with my journey at this point. And, you know, we may either have more work things in common or they understand how difficult it can be to juggle loads of things at once, which it's not that, you know, people that I've known my entire life don't get that, but it's just understanding that or learning and accepting that you can keep adding those people into your network and you should. The more support you find, the better. Like I've got some friends that if I put a post on LinkedIn and it's getting crickets, I can literally be like, girls, can you just put some like heart emojis and like put loads of like, this is the best article ever. Because it's like, and if that helps me not have that vulnerability hangover, like I'm not embarrassed to ask for that support because they're people that I trust and they're people that I would do the same for. So, but sometimes, you know, we can feel like, oh, our home friends just don't get it. Or like, my parents just don't get what I do. And that can be really difficult when you're doing your own thing. So I think, or not even doing your own thing, if you've just chosen a career that doesn't align with your parents' values or family traditions or even society's expectation, finding people that really create that safety net for you and cheerlead you and say your name when you're not in a room is like transformative. And that is, I think, one of the most important things that helps me to keep going is knowing that like I'm not alone in the process, because that can be so difficult and, like I say, isolating.
Yeah, and I think there's a chapter in your book called Knowing What You Stand For, and I think it is that point of knowing exactly what your mission statement is, why you're doing it, knowing who you are, where your goalpost is, and I think you do, once you kind of know all those things and you're so assured in all those things, it is easier to lean on the support that you find in the midst of building that thing, as opposed to like, oh, you should support me because you're my friend and we've known each other for like 15 years. It's about getting to a point where you're like, I'm so confident in knowing exactly why I'm doing this, and what my goalpost is, that I don't really need the fluffing.
Yeah.
But it can also be a really hard place to get to, isn't it?
No, totally. And I think that's why I say, like, please don't settle with what you've already got.
Yeah.
You know, like, be intentional and go, like, what do I need right now? Like, I need somebody to be an accountability partner with me.
Yeah.
I need to be able to have a coffee with someone every Monday morning, us go through our checklist and agree my goals for the week. Yeah. And if the rest of your friends work full time and they can't do that with you, then it's like, okay, like, how can we find the people that might be able to support you with that? And I also think mentors are so important. I think we wait a lot for help to come to us, and actually, like, a mentor's not just going to knock on your door. They're not just going to see your profile and be like, hey, do you want to be mentored? Because actually it would be quite strange if they did. It sounds a bit patronising, right? So you can't get what you don't ask for, right? You can't get a yes if you don't ask. That's like one of my number one things that I always try and remember. Like, you can't get a yes if you don't ask for that help. Yeah. So, you know, trying to find mentors that either help you with like navigating difficult times or help you negotiate, and actually having different people for different things. Yeah. Like that can also, so I got a really good example in my book where I talk about Olivia she's a black female creative. She has a white old man to teach her how to make money. These are her words, not mine. Yeah. She's got a black female creative in the industry who understands her lived experiences and the things that she needs to navigate. And then she's got someone else completely outside of the industry altogether because she wants a sense check from, you know, to make sure she doesn't fall into like industry habits and things that aren't going to help her. Yeah. And I was like, that's so smart. Like it comes back to that point of one person or one group of people don't need to serve your whole life needs. They can't. And they can't. And it's unfair to expect them. Yeah. But just because you don't currently have that doesn't mean that you should live without it. Yeah. So I think being intentional with identifying people on LinkedIn or Instagram, sliding into people's DMs, like half the people I've met, or maybe more than half the people I've built relationships, the people I interviewed in my book, I'd never met them until I'd slid into their DMs and was like, massive fangirl, like, I would love to interview you, or I'd love you to be on a panel, or I just love what you're doing.
Literally speaking about my life.
Yeah, literally. But it works, right? And I think a lot of people just think like, oh, they just have those connections. And I was like, when I moved to London 6 years ago, I had zero connections. Like nobody knew who I was. I'm so proud of the network that I've built because I put myself out there, because I made myself vulnerable, because I didn't know, and exactly that feeling that people have where they're like, but what have I got to offer? Yeah. It's like not everything is about like what you have to offer. It's about thinking like, what do I need and how can I get closer to that?
Yeah, and I think it is that whole thing of like, just to kind of piggyback on what you just said, it's that whole thing of like, literally what's the worst that can happen? They could either completely ignore you or they could be like, ha ha ha, get away. But then even if they do say that, there's like 5 billion other people that can probably help you, and if not even just help you, be the support that you need, give you the necessary advice, open the necessary door. And I think it is just remembering that, like, if not you, then who?
Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
I did a talk recently when I said, if you don't take up space, someone else will take your place. Yeah. And it's such an important thing to remember. It's like, if you've got that dream mentor in mind, like if you don't ask them, someone else will. Yeah. So you might as well put your name in the ring and see if it can go there. Yeah. But yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, you might as well throw your name in there. And it is that thing of like, I think so many people, like I'm saying it, but I've 100% been a victim of it, of like counting myself out before I've even tried. Yeah. And then when I do try, being like, oh, actually, I should have got here about 5 months ago.
Yeah.
Because it's actually working. And I think for anyone who is listening that is suffering, or not suffering, but is dealing with such a huge level of imposter syndrome, or such a huge level of like, I can't do this, I'm not good enough for this, I'm not worthy enough, I don't have the necessary skill set. You literally just have to remember, if not you, then who? And you have to be your biggest advocate. Yeah, self-advocacy.
I actually did a post last week where I was like, I'm bored of talking myself out of things.
Yeah.
I'm bored of telling myself it won't work. Yeah. I'm bored of telling myself they're not going to reply or they won't care. And it was like one of my most engaged posts, because I think so many people, we have great ideas. We can come up with great missions or thinking and like, oh, I'm going to do this year. And then for whatever reason along that journey, we just very quickly convince ourselves why it won't work. Yeah. And it's like just saying to yourself, like, why not? Like, why not? I literally am in that era where I'm just like, I'm just going to go for it. I am not wasting any more time second guessing myself. Like, ask, and if they don't reply, that's fine. They're lost.
And if they don't care, who cares?
Yeah.
Somebody else will.
Literally,
it's fine. Like,
How many times have we said literally?
Yeah, I know. Like, literally, just do your thing and be you. I think this is great, and I'm really happy. Good. Are you happy?
Yeah, I am.
Do you feel like you've gotten everything out? I think you guys should get the book. I think it's such a transformative book. I think it's come at such a great time as well. Like, even in terms of like the tone of where we are in the world and the social media age and there are more entrepreneurs now than a time where I could remember, and there's so many people tapping into that whole notion of being innovative and doing things for themselves and actually believing in themselves. And I think if you are in that space of where you know that there is something in you that you really want to do, but you're almost becoming your biggest blocker, I think this book is so transformative in your journey. And it is that thing of, you've written it to be accessible because it is educational and it is necessary. Like you so rightly said, self-advocacy is essential. It's not optional. So yeah, I hope you guys get it and you have been humble. Yay.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.